I have always been infatuated with stories of rebellion, the call for revolution, the betterment of the disenfranchised, and heroes of reformation. And the story of Spartacus encapsulates and exemplifies these aspects in every possible way, and has thus withstood the test of time to echo in the hearts of any who dare shout liberty against the systems that would dare deprive it. It's been nearly 2,000 years since Spartacus took up arms against Rome. 75 years since Howard Fast wrote the historical fiction novel Spartacus. 65 years since Kurt Russell made the movie, same name. And nearly 15 years since Spartacus Blood and Sand aired on Starz. And it's been a decade since the show concluded. And we're not done. We're not done. And I'm so glad we're not done. Now, if you know anything about me, I wrote these books. This is a vengeful realm. So if you know I wrote these, you know I love the story of Spartacus. If you don't, I wrote this story, this epic fantasy trilogy that reimagines Spartacus's rebellion against Rome, but with the magic and mythology of Kratos' battle against the gods of Olympus and God of War, mixed with the political intrigue of Game of Thrones. So as you can imagine, when Starz announced the release of House of Ashur, I was immediately giddy. Like, super intrigued. Now, while the spin-off will obviously be an alternate history of both the historical events, but also just like a total departure from the show's canon, and I don't need to do a rewatch in preparation for House of Ashur, but I did anyway. Why, you ask? Why, Tim? Why would you do that? Because even without the compelling and erotic visuals, Starz adaptation of Spartacus is one of the most tightly written plots on TV, with top-tier dialogue that has created an itch nothing else over the last 15 years has come close to scratching for me. It was a joy to be back in this world. So whether you need a recap ahead of the House of Ashur spin-off, or you want to return to this world in anticipation of what's to come, let's dive in. Let's relive some of the greatest moments in each season. We'll talk about the writing, we'll talk about the storytelling and the characters and what we can look forward to when House of Ashur actually comes out this winter. So next we're going to go through and we're going to talk about the prequel series, Gods of the Arena. Now, why? I have a couple of reasons. So if you're planning on watching Spartacus for the first time, this might be a hot take because the intro to the prequel season, Gods of the Arena, spoils the end of Season 1, Spartacus Blood and Sand. But I still recommend beginning with Gods of the Arena. Now, couple reasons. Well, the first 3 episodes of Season 1 have some really low budget visuals. Fine. That can turn some people off right away. Besides, Gods of the Arena is a super, super tight 6-episode arc that builds trust in the writing and love for the characters, most of which you're going to learn to hate. So I believe it also serves as a better launch point for what is to come with House of Ashur, because we actually get more of Ashur's origins here. So without further ado, let's jump into Spartacus, Gods of the Arena. The beauty of Spartacus is the multi-protagonist approach to storytelling. Like the way these characters' stories all weave together is poetry in motion. The primary character arcs we're going to be discussing are through the eyes of first, Batiatus. So, Lanista of Capua, who oversees his father Titus's ludus. Batiatus is relentless to elevate his station, which makes him a really gritty anti-hero who you can't help but root for. Then we have Gannicus, and Gannicus is like the champion gladiator of the House of Batiatus. So Gannicus is like carefree, quick to laugh. He turns everything into a joke kind of nature, makes him an easy character to fall in love with. Besides, he's beautiful. The pretty privilege has never hurt, right? Then we have Crixus, a stone-hauling slave purchased by Batiatus in his attempts to gain favor, which turns unexpected dividends. Crixus' story is inspiring. Everyone loves an underdog story. So even if you did watch Season 1, Blood and Sand, which first, like you watch that first and it kind of harbored a disdain for the character, it's easy to root for him in this and watch his ascent. Then we have Lucretia, the wife of Batiatus. And Lucretia, played by Lucy Lawless, is as vicious as her husband, and she is good at getting what she wants. And then lastly, of course, we have Ashur, a gladiatorial recruit within the House of Batiatus at the same time as Crixus. And perhaps the most devious mind in the original series, there are many reasons why Nick Tarabay's character is being brought back in the House of Ashur. So here we go. Let's get into it and see his origins. But the interconnectivity of these 5 storylines is fascinating. Some stuff presented in Gods of the Arena is set up for future payoffs, something that the series does really, really well. Like, there are many elements that are actually introduced here in this prequel season, and those seeds blossom and bear fruit all the way in season 2, Spartacus Vengeance. So from a writing perspective, the way in which literally nothing is wasted cultivates such a trust in the writers and the showrunners. And I love that. We love that. We love that. So let's get into it. We will begin with episode 1, Past Transgressions. Now, this is written to be a gritty rags to riches story from the onset. We're introduced to Batiatus, his wife Lucretia, and their good old pal Salonius. So viewers of season 1 will be intrigued to find that, yes, they were once, in fact, the very best of friends. Well, together, they watched the morning matches in a small fighting pit within Capua. And Gannicus takes to the sand, smile upon his face, he's blowing kisses to the crowd, and this dude is him. He is himbo, right? At one point, he plants both of his swords in the sand to walk over to his still very much armed opponent and fight him with his fists to the roar of the crowd. Now, Batiatus wants the fight to last long enough for the men of position to arrive. And here we start to meet the system characters, the antagonistic system characters who, they make the rules within Capua. So most importantly is Tullius. Tullius is a wealthy merchant and a former soldier, and it's his ear Batiatus needs to bend if he wants to secure position for Gannicus in the opening games of the new arena that's currently being constructed in Capua. Now, this is an arena that Tullius himself is credited for its building. Like, he's the one who's bringing this to town, essentially. And that's important, and we will come back to that later. But naturally, Gannicus finishes toying with his opponent just moments before Tullius and Batiatus, who is like another rival Lanista, right before they arrive. So now, upon leaving the fighting pit, Lucretia reconnects with Gaia, an old friend who has recently been widowed after her many appetites have emptied his coffers. Now, this leaves Batiatus and Salonius to discuss their plans for the future and the propositions ahead of them, how they might be able to get their men into the matches of note so that they can actually be a part of the opening games of the arena. It's here that we meet Crixus, and Crixus at this point is one of Tullius's stone-hauling slaves. So in an attempt to make introduction, Batiatus offers to purchase Crixus at exorbitant cost that requires like a 20 denarii loan from Salonius to be able to complete the transaction. And Batiatus has no use for Crixus at this point. At this point in time, he's just willing to pay to have the opportunity to speak to Tullius. And it does work. But before Batiatus receives invitation to meet with Tullius, we get to spend some time in the Ludus where Gaia oogles at the gladiators. Gannicus drinks and has sex to his heart's content, and we get to see Ashur, a recruit now vying to be welcomed into the Brotherhood of the House of Batiatus, alongside his fellow countryman Dagon. Now, a lot of foreshadowing, really well executed foreshadowing, but some foreshadowing about Batiatus' father, some warnings of not overreaching and the perils of ambition, both from Lucretia and Salonius. This is like warning Batiatus, which of course he ignores. And soon enough, Batiatus earns his meeting with Tullius. Now, petitioning for Gannicus to be positioned in the opening games of the new arena, Batiatus brags to his rival, Batiatus, that any of his titans could best any one of Batius's men, blindfolded. So Tullius offers to call in a favor with the magistrate and allow a match between Gannicus and I believe his name is Otho, doesn't matter. One of Batius's gladiators, and they're going to fight in the marketplace. Now, when the match is set to begin, Batiatus calls the challenge to the letter and presents a blindfold for Gannicus to wear. And it's one of the cooler and more creative and more difficult to watch because of that combat scenes. Gannicus fights blindfolded and somehow manages to defeat Otho, which is crazy, and the crowd loves it. So impressed, Tullius extends an invitation to Batiatus to discuss Gannicus' position in the opening games. After another round of sexy times and more drinking and more foreshadowing, because that's what we do here. But Batiatus goes to meet with Tullius, where the brilliant writing that this series is known for really starts to show up. There's just micro twist after micro twist. So Tullius does want Gannicus in the opening games, but he offers to purchase Gannicus for himself. And Batiatus is confused because he's just like, you're not a Lanista, but he has a vested interest in Vedius's ludus. So suddenly, Batiatus is outnumbered, and he stands his ground. He's like, Gannicus is not for sale, dude. To which Tullius replies, everything is for sale. Question is but price. But he takes offense that he allowed Batiatus to purchase one of his slaves, Crixus. But now Batiatus is denying him the same opportunity. But again, Batiatus refuses to sell Gannicus. And this is a harrowing scene, and it's something that the series is known for, but it cuts back and forth between Lucretia and Gaia having an opium-induced bout of lovemaking, and Tullius and Vedius and a group of men taking turns beating the literal crap out and literally pissing on a defenseless Batiatus. The episode ends with a threat. Sell me Gannicus, or be denied from the games forever. Oof. But such are the perils of reaching beyond your station. Now, most people, they'd be like, all right, gave him my best shot, too bad, I'm out. Not Batiatus. As he himself says in episode 2, Missio, a man of ambition is capable of anything. So what does he do? Well, one of his gladiatorial recruits, Indus, gives Missio. It's a sign of surrender. Batiatus goes ballistic. He condemns him to the mines and shouts, I will see these walls fall to ruin before Missio is given. We do not surrender in this house. He's not just talking about on the sands of the arena, is he? No. But as always, what happens to a man of ambition when opportunity presents itself? Batiatus doubles down. So now he attempts to go over Tullius's head. If he can garner favor of a Roman senator, Varus, he might get Gannicus into the games on his own accord and not need Tullius. And so a devious plan hatches. Batiatus facilitates a plot to attack Vedius, making him indisposed, so that Lucretia and Gaia can lure Senator Varus to the ludus. Now, Ashur, Dagon, his fellow countryman, and Indus, the other recruit who was just condemned to the mines, are set to task because they alone don't bear the mark of Batiatus. They don't have the brand. And they wouldn't therefore be traced back to him should they fail. Now, they're promised the mark of the Brotherhood for their service if they succeed. But in order to do so, they must attack Vedius in the streets. And this is where Ashur's story really begins. Because they succeed in killing Vedius's men and beating Vedius to a pulp, some slight retribution for how Batiatus was so cruelly mistreated. But Vedius saw Indus's face. And so, from the beginning, Ashur was told by Batiatus he must kill Indus. In this scene, Ashur shows remorse. He apologizes, calling Indus brother. Now, this bit of humanity could just be the show explaining to the audience so that they understand why he did what he did. But I choose to look at this moment and believe that Ashur really just wants to be accepted into the Brotherhood. Like, that's really all he wants. And this is a sad and unfortunate truth that Indus isn't part of those plans. Could he be calloused and self-serving at this point in time? Of course, yeah, sure. He gets to be a pretty awful human being long before Spartacus' vengeance, right? And that's where he goes really off the rails. But it's just a matter of when did it exactly start? And we'll come back to that. Meanwhile, Batiatus attempts to woo Varus, Senator Varus, with a showing of his gladiators, hoping to fill the void left by Vedius's absence. Now, Gannicus and Crixus are a fight kind of a show, look at my wares. And now Crixus has been training with Oenomaus, something Oenomaus isn't all that pleased with. Like, he wants to retake his mantle as champion after his fall to Theocles. But between that and his best friend Gannicus being the champion, he's seemingly put to doctore duty to train Crixus. Now, this is a lot of foreshadowing. But anyway, Crixus is a quick study and puts up quite a fight against Gannicus. But Varus isn't really all that impressed. He doesn't really care for the games, and that's something that Gaia knows all too well. So she tells Batiatus to have Gannicus bathed, have him oiled, send him to the villa, allow for a closer inspection after he's been given some stimulants. And here's where the episode really sets in motion a bunch of subplots that will build throughout the season and eventually be reconciled all the way in season 2, Spartacus Vengeance. For the viewing pleasure of Senator Barrs, Gannicus and Melita is Oenomaus' wife, are forced to lay together. Now, if you're like, who? She isn't just the slave, like a slave in the house. She is the house slave of Lucretia. And yes, Oenomaus' wife. So we have Oenomaus' best friend, Oenomaus' wife, being forced to lay together. And let's harken back to an earlier scene. Sharing a drink, Oenomaus, Gannicus, and Melita have an interaction in which Melita asks, well, what would happen if Oenomaus and Gannicus had to fight each other upon the sands? And Gannicus replied, he would give Oenomaus a glorious death. You know, we are slaves, burden of choice and consequence equally removed. Foreshadowing? Yes. Now, another little quote from this scene, Melita asks, well, what if there's a situation you can't fight your way out of? And Gannicus replies, well, I'll have to fuck my way out. Well, real quick, let's cut back to what's happening with the other gladiators. So having succeeded in Batiatus' mission, Ashur and Dagon are given the mark of the brotherhood, the B for Batiatus on the forearm. And at the time, Doctore Ulpius, he says, you may bear the mark, but don't ever think yourself a gladiator. And many among the brotherhood do not accept them for having never completed the real test, instead of passing Batiatus' test of loyalty. So when Ashur argues, Ulpius begins to beat the crap out of him. And Oenomaus is actually the one who attempts to stop him. Now, Ulpius has already been dismissed from his duties as Doctore by Batiatus for being a relic of the past and like his father's man. So he attacks Oenomaus to see like if he's actually taught him anything. Now, similar to the cutting back and forth in episode 1, where Gannicus is getting down and dirty with Oenomaus' wife, while Oenomaus is in a fight to the death with a man he doesn't want to fight. And it's brutal. It's heartbreaking. This scene, like, further showcases the similarities between love and war. And Oenomaus kills Ulpius, and he's now named the new Doctore. And Varus is extremely impressed by Gannicus and Melita's showing, much more so than Gannicus and Crixus' fight. So he offers Batiatus position in the primus of his games, effectively going over Tullius's head altogether. So now Batiatus is certainly proud of himself, but Gannicus, Melita, and Oenomaus are not super pleased with how this evening has gone. But Melita even says, we do what we must in this house, but the burden of choice and conscience are not so far removed as Gannicus phrased earlier. Now, what I love so much about Spartacus is the butterfly effect of the writing. One event seemingly disconnected from other plot lines or characters affects everyone and everything. It's just brilliant. But there is nothing worth celebrating in the House of Batiatus because every victory is a short, very short breath, and every defeat is a long sigh because in the wake of Batiatus securing position for Gannicus in the games, it's all for naught when his father Titus returns from Sicilia. So moved by Salonius's concerns for Batiatus' ambition and the fallout it could cause, Titus, Batiatus' father, returns to restore honor to his family ludus. Having no faith in Gannicus as champion and disliking Lucretia for her ill breeding and her inability to produce an heir, he scolds Batiatus for looking to glories and triumphs beyond the reach of a common lanista. So Titus undoes all that Batiatus has worked so hard for. And so Batiatus is now forced to apologize to Tullius, the man who pissed on him, and to regain the right to fight in the morning matches. Once again, not the important matches, but the morning matches of the like pits. He must make his men fight one another. So one of his hand-picked men, Crixus, against one of Titus's forging, Octus. Now, Octus is Barca's lover, and we haven't talked about him yet, but now's a good time. Barca, the beast of Carthage, is a gladiator and one of the bodyguards Batiatus chooses to have accompany him on his dirty deeds whenever he leaves the ludus. So the reason I want to spend some time on Barca is because of all the men who torment Ashur, Barca is probably the worst perpetrator. So despite bearing the mark, Barca doesn't care that Ashur, he's still literally pisses in Ashur's porridge. So he and Dagon eat Octus and Barca's pigeons. It's something that we'll come back to later in Spartacus Blood and Sand when we're introduced to Petrus. But the stage is set. Crixus and Octus must fight. One of either one of the sons, one of the fathers. And we'll see if Crixus wins, Batiatus could earn his father's respect. And maybe, just maybe, his father will say, okay, the house is in order. I'll return to Sicilia. And Oenomaus has done a really good job of training Crixus because he defeats Octus. And this begins the first of many victories for the undefeated Gaul. The victory proves to Titus that Batiatus indeed possesses the keen eye of a Lanista, but even with honor restored, supposedly, and his ludus in capable hands, Titus doesn't want to return to Sicilia. He elects to remain in Capua alongside his son. And you can imagine who's not happy about that. Begins with an L, ends in Lucretia. Now, episode 4, Beneath the Mask. The biggest challenge of Titus being home, it's not how he condescends to Lucretia or how he's constantly stifling Batiatus's ambition. It's because him being home makes it really difficult to host the wild sex parties for the Roman elites. So attempting to distract his father so Lucretia and Gaia and Solonius can host a group of Roman elites, Batiatus offers that he and his father should go abroad and procure new gladiators together. But first, Ashur and Dagon take to the sands for the first time. It's not the best showing. Ashur does not look good. Dagon kicks ass, but Ashur gets his ass kicked. And although they win, Ashur celebrates, but it's really Dagon that single-handedly won the victory. So this leads to Oenomaus saying, you bear the mark of the brotherhood, an honor you do not deserve. He, talking about Dagon, receives twice the coin because you are half the man. And once again, Dagon can't form his own words. He speaks Aramaic. So Ashur will no longer be needed once he can start talking for himself. So Ashur is again rejected by the brotherhood. He was rejected by Ulpius. And now even Crixus is kind of like, you're a recruit and I'm above you. And now Oenomaus, that's a lot of rejection. That's a lot of rejection. But what separates heroes from villains is what they do with that pain. Do they ensure such harm never comes to anyone else? Or do they inflict it upon others as retribution? Well, we won't have to wait very long to see how Ashur responds to this afflicted pain. Because back at the Ludus, while Batiatus and Titus are out in Neapolis trying to procure a new gladiator, Lucretia and Gaia attend to the Roman elites, hoping to curry favor for their futures. The sexcapades begin, and the gladiators are presented and ripe for the taking. So when a Roman senator asks for Dagon, Ashur interprets rather inaccurately. He basically hands Dagon over to the senator for rough pleasure. Even one of the other gladiators, Raskos, who overhears this exchange, is kind of like, dude, like it. But what goes around comes around. And that can be said to everyone at this party. And so when Tullius arrives, it sets everyone on edge. So he demands to fight Gannicus in a contest in which Gannicus can't strike back or he'll be killed. He's a slave. And therefore, he just kind of has to take beating after beating and just kind of take it. And meanwhile, Gannicus is having a tough time between his growing affections for Melita and her rejection of those affections. And the guilt eating away at him, he's starting to distance himself from Oenomaus. And Oenomaus just believes, like, Gannicus distancing himself is because he doesn't respect him as the new doctore. It's all around, it's just rough. Like, the guilt and the shame is really building up. But no one has a tougher time in this episode than Gaia. A, she wants a husband for herself. B, hoping to ensure that Tullius never tells Titus about their little soiree, Gaia attempts to woo Tullius, to which he bashes her head in and just walks out. Now, Lucretia is an absolute mess. And when Titus and Batiatus return home and find Gaia dead, it gets even worse. Titus is livid and blames Lucretia for his son's repeated attempts to rise above his station. And he demands that Gaia be thrown from the cliff and just forgotten. Lucretia, at this point, promises vengeance. And the butterfly wings beat. Now, episode 5 is one of the best episodes of television, period. Full stop. It has everything. It begins with Titus offering Batiatus an ultimatum. Divorce Lucretia, or forever be removed from this house. Both of you, out. Now, I don't know about you, but most things that begin with an ultimatum tend not to end well. So while Batiatus plots a means of removing Titus and his pesky ultimatum from his path, Lucretia takes aim at Crixus to help her make a son for Batiatus. And Titus, he has Oenomaus organize a tournament to gauge the quality of the men. Now, those that fare well in the tournament will be elevated, and those who fall short will be sold to the mines. A few rounds into this tournament, Ashur remains winless, and he's set to fight Dagon, who, if you'll recall, isn't exactly pleased with Ashur after the night he just had, rough pleasure and all. So Ashur has to ask Dagon to go easy on him. Just like, you don't have to let me win, just don't embarrass me, right? Dagon has started to pick up on certain words and phrases. He's starting to learn his languages. So he informs Ashur, soon I won't need you anymore. In this contest, Dagon thoroughly kicks the crap out of Ashur. But in his defeat, Ashur asks to lose on his feet and not on his knees. He then, in typical Ashur fashion, stands and slashes Dagon across the eye. And again, in typical Ashur fashion, he parades around naming himself victor while the rest of the Brotherhood watches silently, bruh. And they feel bad for Dagon. Now, remember when I said when heroes are wronged, they make sure it doesn't happen to others? But when villains are wronged, they perpetuate the violence onto others? This is Ashur. This is what he does. Meanwhile, Batiatus plots to kill his father. He's even holding the would-be murder weapon, but then Titus says to him, "You are my son, and I will always love you, no matter what path you take." So after that, even Batiatus can't kill his father. He refuses to abandon Lucretia and therefore must prepare to leave the Ludus. However, Titus asks him to watch the final conclusion of this tournament. It's Gannicus and Crixus. Now, Gannicus, a man Batiatus has named champion, and Crixus, a man forged under his tenure. Titus is kind of like, they're both your men. You should watch. Now, should Gannicus lose, he will be sold to Tullius. Now, Tullius sent a carafe of wine to serve as apology for murdering Gaia. Wine for blood, pretty ridiculous, right? Anyway, Oenomaus shares with Gannicus that what his fate will be should he lose, and tells him, you need to get your head on straight. But the reason his head isn't on straight is because he's in love with Oenomaus' wife. And Gannicus tells Melita his love for her, but she rejects him. And so Gannicus decides he doesn't want to remain in House Batiatus. So he fights, but he drops his guard on purpose and allows Crixus to win, sealing his fate so he will be sold to Tullius. But before Titus can move to honor terms, he falls ill. Coincidence? No. Now, while Batiatus, the Medicus, and Oenomaus rush to town to secure the necessary herbs to heal Titus, Lucretia stays with him to take care of him and tend to his needs. To which he says to her, "Tell me I have been mistaken, that you're not the serpent I have always thought you to be." And she tells him, "No, I'm far worse." Remember that wine I mentioned came from Tullius? Well, Lucretia has been poisoning it. In fact, she's been poisoning all of Titus's wine, and for a long while. It's what sent him to flee to the more temperate climate of Sicilia in the first place. But ever since his return, she's doubled down. So while Titus is choking on his own blood, Melita has gone to visit Gannicus on the evening before he's supposed to be sold, and she brings the same wine. Shortly after telling him that she too shares his affections, the poison in her cup gets the best of her too. So both Batiatus and Oenomaus return home to find father and wife dead. And guess who Lucretia points the finger at? It was Tullius. Remember when I said Lucretia promised vengeance on the man who killed Gaia? Those are those butterfly wings. What better way to have your enemy killed than make him other enemies? One's willing to carry out the deed. As long as they possess the proper motivation, they'll see it done. You don't have to lift a finger. And Lucretia just did that. And Melita wasn't meant to be used as such a pawn to make this happen. She was a casualty born of those willing to do whatever it takes. And remember, a man with ambition is capable of anything. Episode 6, The Bitter End. It's all in the title, isn't it? Moved by Lucretia's manipulation, Batiatus plans to kill Tullius and seize Vedius's ludus to defy the gladiators between Salonius and Batiatus. It's a good plan, and Salonius plays his part in baiting Tullius to perfection. Batiatus, with a clutch of his men, Oenomaus, Gannicus, and Barca, they beat, abuse, and leave Tullius bleeding out in the foundation of the very arena he helped build for Capua. But as is true of all of the Spartacus series' best writing, there's a twist. Salonius, after weeks of Batiatus's abuse, whether it was taking his money, using knowledge gained in confidence to move against Tullius, ignoring counsel, speaking down to him, or taking him for granted, Salonius finally snaps. He makes a deal with Vedius, securing all of Vedius's men for himself, leaving Batiatus empty-handed. And he says to his old friend, "It has taken years and the price of blood, but at last I see you for what you are, a man who holds no one in esteem beyond himself. I owe you gratitude. Without you to show me the way, I'd never have the nerve to betray those closest to me." If that doesn't make for an awkward seating arrangement when they're sitting atop the Pulvinus to watch the games, I don't know what does. But in the great games to commemorate the opening of the new arena, all of the day's victors are set to compete in a ring of fire in a melee kind of style. So we have Gannicus, we have Crixus, we have Dagon, we have Ashur, and they're amongst those who fight on behalf of House Batiatus. Barca's not in these games because he sustained an injury during the attack on Tullius, so he's left out of the games. Now, Salonius's newfound men, he has a bunch in the primus of these games, including this hulking beast of a dude, Cabarus. And Batiatus's gladiators have rivalries amongst themselves to deal with, regardless of Cabarus. Now, Oenomaus tells Gannicus to honor Melita's death with blood. But while Gannicus is focused on Salonius's men, Crixus promises Gannicus they will have a proper contest after he had dropped his guard in the last Reckoning tournament. And Dagon is glaring daggers at Ashur with his one remaining eye. So the moment the fighting begins, and while Gannicus and Crixus slaughter Salonius's men, Dagon sets on Ashur. And the battle sequence is intense, it's bloody, it's personal. But Ashur flings sand into Dagon's remaining good eye, which allows him to land the killing blow. And one by one, the battlefield is whittled down. When it's there's a moment of quiet, Ashur tells Crixus, together, let's defeat Gannicus, and then we can battle amongst ourselves and see who becomes champion of Capua. Now, Crixus is seeking the glory for himself, and wanting a proper contest with Gannicus, he just slashes Ashur right across his lower leg, breaking the bone, and then shoves him out of the ring of fire. We'll come back to that. So Crixus joins Gannicus in engaging with Cabarus, but when Crixus gets exposed, Gannicus knocks him from the ring of fire to save his life before Cabarus can kill him. And then Gannicus eventually defeats Cabarus himself. And Gannicus celebrates, and he's named champion of Capua. But Batiatus' victory over Salonius is short-lived because Salonius moves the magistrates to suggest that Gannicus should be given his freedom as a way to celebrate his victory and commemorate the opening games of the new arena. Who, after everything that Batiatus has sacrificed, he has no choice. Before all of Capua, he has to award Gannicus his freedom, and his ill-gotten gains dissolve, nothing left. But with all the obstacles removed, House Batiatus is ready to rise, as is the legend of Crixus, and of course, Spartacus. Spartacus, Gods of the Arena is the perfect prequel to Spartacus, and the writers did such a fantastic job in planting seeds to be harvested later in Season 2, Vengeance. But what were the most impactful moments for you in Gods of the Arena? Want more Spartacus before the launch of House of Ashur? Like, follow, subscribe, and don't forget, comment away. Let's talk about this wonderful series. Stay in the loop. Can't wait to talk to you more.